Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 278 is a little under 2 weeks away, and I wanted to go through the entire pay-per-view main card, talk about each fight briefly, and then at the end of the video, I am going to grade UFC 278. But before I even get into any of the fights or grading the card, I left a link in the description to the Tapology page with the full UFC 278 card. I want you to go look over the main card and come back and comment what grade would you give UFC 278. I want to know your grade before I even give you my grade. So starting off with the main event, we have a fight that I believe is being massively overlooked. It is Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards 2. This is a rematch from earlier in their careers back in 2015 where Kamaru Usman won a decision over Leon Edwards, and they both have improved drastically since that initial fight. And you have Kamaru Usman, who won the belt off of Tyron Woodley in a dominant, unsuspected performance. I picked Kamaru Usman in that fight, but a lot of people thought that Tyron Woodley would win that fight. And he wins the belt, and then he goes on to defend his belt 5 times. He's defeated Colby Covington twice, once by stoppage. He's defeated Jorge Masvidal twice, once by stoppage. And he's defeated Gilbert Burns. And I feel like a lot of people have criticized Kamaru Usman, saying, oh, he's beaten up, blown up lightweights. But I believe his win streak, you look at Jorge Masvidal at the time he 50-45'd him, was on a massive tear. You look at Colby Covington, there's no denying that Colby Covington is one of the best 170-pounders on the planet. He beat Colby Covington twice. Some people think that it should have been a draw maybe in the second fight, and the second fight was very close. But Kamaru Usman, that doesn't change the fact he stopped Colby Covington in their fight at UFC 245. And Kamaru Usman has shown that he is a very tough champion to dethrone. And you have Leon Edwards, who's on a 9-fight win streak. And I know there's a lot of criticisms about the win streak of Leon Edwards. His last fight was against Nate Diaz at UFC 263, where Leon Edwards just brutalized Nate Diaz for 4.5 rounds. In the last minute of the fight, Nate Diaz hits him with a big right hand, rocks Leon Edwards, and that's all people talk about. Leon Edwards has to be one of the most unluckiest fighters I've ever seen, because people criticize his win streak and say he hasn't fought anyone. He has a no contest against Belal Muhammad in a fight that he was winning. There was an unfortunate eye poke from Leon Edwards, and the fight was stopped because Belal Muhammad couldn't continue. But people forget, Leon Edwards accepted 3 fights with Khamzat Chimaev. Okay, 3 fights with Khamzat Chimaev. He accepted a fight with Colby Covington on the 3rd time when Khamzat Chimaev pulled out. He's accepted a fight with Jorge Masvidal at UFC 269, which Jorge Masvidal pulled out and then conveniently had a fight with Colby Covington like a couple weeks later. It's not that Leon Edwards isn't accepting these fights. It's not that he doesn't want to take on top-ranked guys, but the fights just have not materialized. And he's looked good in the fights that he's been in, and he's a very well-rounded fighter. You look what he did to Nate Diaz. He brutalized him the entire fight, made Nate Diaz look like he didn't even belong in there outside of that last minute. The fight before that, he was brutalizing Belal Muhammad and defending the takedowns, which shows me that maybe he can be able to defend the takedowns in the Kamaru Usman fight. Obviously, Belal Muhammad and Kamaru Usman are not the same level of wrestlers, but I'm just saying that Leon Edwards has shown improvement and great skills to show that he is a legit contender at 170 pounds. Before that, he beat Rafael Dos Anjos, which I believe is a solid win. I get Dos Anjos has since moved back to 55, and he has losses to Colby and Usman, but Rafael Dos Anjos is a very good fighter. That's a solid win from Leon Edwards, and it's not his fault that these fights just haven't materialized, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Usman versus Edwards, because I'm genuinely curious. In that first fight, Usman was able to out-grapple Leon. But in this second fight, I believe Leon's grappling has gotten significantly better. And I'm curious if Edwards is able to stuff those takedowns. I just don't think it's going to be a good night for Kamaru Usman, because Leon Edwards is a far better striker, but it's always the threat of the takedown. How is it going to play out? I think this is a fight. A lot of people are saying, oh, definitely Kamaru Usman's going to win. I think this is a borderline 50-50 fight. I'm still not sure who I'm picking. And when we get closer to the fights, I will be doing full breakdown and prediction videos for all the notable fights on UFC 278. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss those. But I'm really looking forward to this main event for the welterweight title. I think Leon Edwards has a legitimate chance to dethrone Kamaru Usman, and I think that's what makes this fight amazing. Both guys are super well-rounded. You have Kamaru Usman with his power and his grappling. You have Leon Edwards super well around it, good footwork, good technical striking, and decent takedown defense. And I think this fight could play out, and it could be a back and forth fight, and it could be a very exciting fight. And I think a lot of people are just overlooking it based on the personalities of Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards. Moving on to the co-main event, we have Paulo Costa versus Luke Rockhold. Paulo Costa comes into this fight on a 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Adesanya in his title fight, and then he's only fought once since then against Marvin Vettori, where he missed weight, and then the fight ended up taking place at 205, and he had a great fight with Marvin Vettori. I thought it was pretty close, and now, he's on a 2-fight losing streak, and people were wondering, who's Costa going to fight next? He was supposed to fight Rockhold at 277. We weren't sure, what was going on. There was some talk that it was getting moved, earlier in August, and then it ended up on UFC 278, and this is a co-main event that I wasn't too sure of, and I still feel like this is more like a featured fight on a main card. You have Luke Rockhold, who hasn't fought since all the way back in 2019, and his last 2 fights, he's been brutally KO'd, once by Jan Blachowicz and once by Yoel Romero. And Luke Rockhold is a guy that's a former middleweight champion, but we don't know where he's at because he's been out for so long. And you have Paulo Costa, who's had the weight cutting issues and all that stuff, but you look at the middleweight division, you have Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. If Adesanya is able to defeat Pereira, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, then what do you do with the division? I believe there is a chance, and this sounds crazy because both guys are on 2-fight losing streaks right now. The winner of Paulo Costa versus Luke Rockhold could be the number 1 contender. There's really no one else in the division to fight for the belt if Adesanya is able to defeat Pereira. They're not giving it to Robert Whittaker for a 3rd try. They're not giving it to Vettori for a 3rd try. It's just not happening. So who else is up next? I don't know. So the winner of this fight could fight for the middleweight title in their next fight. And this is a compelling style matchup because Costa's never in a boring fight. He's always marching forward, throwing haymakers, ripping to the body. And you have Luke Rockhold, who in his prime was so good. He was a good striker. He had his defensive striking, deficiencies, but he was a very good striker. He had a good variety of attacks, and then he was really good on the ground. I think Luke Rockhold's grappling is vastly underrated, especially his jiu-jitsu and his top game. If he gets you down, it's so hard to get out from underneath of him. But the one question mark about Luke Rockhold is his chin. And Costa, a lot of people confuse Costa because he's so big and muscular that he's some crazy power puncher, and he throws some decent power, but he's not necessarily a knockout artist. Out of 13 wins, he has 11 knockouts, but a lot of those are TKOs. He's not putting guys out cold. But I'm curious to see, with Costa's punching power, how does Luke Rockhold's chin hold up? Because that's been the question mark about Luke Rockhold. His chin is made of glass. Out of Luke Rockhold's 5 losses, all 5 of those losses come via knockout. And when he gets knocked out, he gets brutally KO'd. That's why a lot of people kind of said, maybe it's time for him to retire. He moved up to 205 after getting KO'd by Yoel Romero, and there was talk of him even fighting John Jones. People forget that. People actually thought Jan Blachowicz was a layup fight for Luke Rockhold. He was going to win that fight. He was already talking crap to John Jones. And once he beat Jan Blachowicz, they were going to give him a title fight. Obviously, Jan Blachowicz had other plans, brutally KO'd Luke Rockhold. And now, especially if Rockhold wins this fight, I talked about it being a number 1 contender fight, but if Luke Rockhold wins this fight, I think he's almost definitely fighting Adesanya next if Adesanya is able to defeat Alex Pereira at UFC 281 in Madison Square Garden in November. But if he's not, I think Costa could be right up there. I think they could sell the angle. Costa was drunk the night before and this and that. And I think they could book that Adesanya matchup. And the lead up to Adesanya Costa 1 was a very fun lead up. And a lot of people were excited for that fight. And I think there would be an appetite for a rematch there. But I'd be very curious if Rockhold even looks close to prime Rockhold, even a shell of himself, maybe 70% of what he once was. I'm curious to see how he would do in a title fight against Adesanya because he has very good grappling, very good jiu-jitsu, and I can't wait to see this Costa versus Rockhold fight because for me, it's whether or not Rockhold's chin holds up, and I don't know if it's going to. Moving down the card, the featured fight on the card, and I absolutely love this matchup. Jose Aldo versus Merab Dvalishvili. This is an amazing fight. You have Jose Aldo who comes in on a 3-fight win streak. You have Merab who's coming in on a huge win streak. Jose Aldo's last fight was a win against Rob Font where he hurt Rob Font multiple times. Fight before that, he beats Pedro Munoz. Looks like the elite of the elite. And a lot of people question Jose Aldo moving down to bantamweight. Can he make that cut? He had trouble at 45, and people thought it was a death sentence for Jose Aldo. He has reinvigorated his career at 135 pounds, and right now, I think he's on the cusp of a title shot. And I think Merab is on a cusp of a title shot too. He's talking about if he wins this fight, he might go down to 125 because him and Aljamain Sterling are teammates. And I don't know how this fight, fits into the title picture, because right now you have, Aljamain Sterling defending against TJ Dillashaw. And then, you have Yan versus O'Malley. I think the winner of that fight could get a title shot. Then you have Dominic Cruz versus Marlon Vera. I think that's a little bit behind this in terms of earning a title shot. But the bantamweight division is just stacked with amazing fun fights. It has so many elite fighters. There is elite level fighters who aren't even in the top 15 of the bantamweight division. That's how nasty the bantamweight division is. And for Merab Dvalishvili, his biggest win is against Marlon Moraes in a fight he almost lost. That was his last fight at UFC 266, and he almost got stopped by Marlon Moraes. And I believe Marlon Moraes is still a very good fighter. I just believe his chin is a massive liability. And unfortunately, he gassed out, and then Merab was able to get him down and just brutalize him and finish him via TKO. But still, outside of that fight, the Jose Aldo fight is the biggest test for Merab. And Merab likes to take guys down and just grind on them. And who has some of the best takedown defense ever? Jose Aldo. So I'm really interested in this matchup, because can Merab get Jose Aldo down and beat him up? I don't know. Can Jose Aldo keep the fight standing? Because if Jose Aldo can keep it standing, I think he is the far superior striker. And then also you have the fact you have a legend like Jose Aldo. If he wins this fight, both these guys are top ranked. I think Merab is number 6 right now. I think Jose Aldo is like number 3 or 4. If Jose Aldo is able to go out there and have a great performance against Merab Dvalishvili, he's right there in title contention. I don't know how the division's going to play out, because if O'Malley starches Yan by some chance, then I think he's probably fighting for a title. If Petr Yan goes out there and beats the brakes off of Sean O'Malley, I could see him getting a title shot. Then you have the fact Aljo versus TJ. We don't know how that's going to play out. For all we know, that could be a controversial split decision. So the bantamweight division is a very fun division right now. And Jose Aldo versus Merab, I think, is the best fight to make, because this is a massive test for Merab. And then also, this is a big fight for Jose Aldo, because if he wins, he puts his name right up there in the top 3 of the division. Moving down the card, and this is where the card kind of has a fall off. You have Alexander Romanov versus Marcin Tybura. This is 2 top 15 ranked heavyweights, but I don't know how much this fight really means. Marcin Tybura is coming off a loss against Alexander Volkov at UFC 267. Romanov's coming off a win, but the win's against a short notice Chase Sherman. Romanov looks like he could be a future contender in the heavyweight division. And, he's undefeated right now. He's 16-0. And I just don't know how much I'm super interested in this matchup, honestly. If Tybura wins, then, he kind of ends all hype for Romanov. But outside of that, the heavyweight division, I feel like once you get out of that top 6 or so, it falls off a cliff. And while I'm interested in this fight, I feel like this is more like a prelim headliner. I don't know if this belongs on the main card of a UFC pay-per-view, but I can see it. I can see this opening up the card. Honestly, this would be a good card opener or a prelim headliner. I still think it's a fight where you see Romanov test it for the first time. I think Marcin Tybura is the best opponent he's ever faced. So there's that. So we get to see how good he is, and he's just looked like he's been improving. But again, he hasn't fought the best competition. So even though the fact that he's 16-0, it's not against great competition. And Marcin Tybura looked terrible in his Alexander Volkov fight. Before that, he beat Walt Harris. But what does that really mean at this point? Before that, he beat Greg Hardy. What does that mean? Greg Hardy's not even in the UFC anymore. So this fight doesn't interest me a whole lot outside of what is the upside for Alexander Romanov. Moving on to the fight that opens up the main card. And this one actually disgusted me a little bit. We have former light heavyweight Tyson Pedro versus Harry Hunsucker. This has no business being on the main card of a UFC pay-per-view. Harry Hunsucker's lost his last 2 fights. Tyson Pedro won his last fight against Isaac Villanueva. But what does that really mean? Before that, he lost 2 fights. One to Mauricio Shogun Rua, one to OSP. These were years ago, because he's only had 1 fight in the last 4 years. This has no business being on the pay-per-view main card of UFC 278. This is a terrible fight. I do not care about this fight whatsoever. Outside of maybe a quick knockout, this fight means nothing in the division. It's two low-level heavyweights, and the heavyweight division isn't even that great to begin with. So the fact that I'm saying low-level heavyweights, I mean, this is a terrible fight that I really have no interest in. And actually, this brings down the card. This is like when Miesha Tate versus Lauren Murphy was on the main card of UFC 276. Thanks to the MMA gods for knocking that one off the main card of 276. That's kind of what this is. I would prefer a 4-fight main card over seeing Pedro versus Hunsucker. This is a terrible fight that I have no interest in, and it actually knocks down the card a little bit. So as far as a grade for UFC 278, I believe the top 3 fights are amazing matchups that I really want to see. You know, could the co-main event be a little bit better? Maybe, you know, a women's title fight underneath as the co-main event, maybe like Valentina Shevchenko or something along those lines, or maybe Carla Esparza, Weili Zhang is the co-main event. Yes, but I still think these top 3 fights are very good fights, and I think the main event is vastly underrated. I'm very excited for the main event of UFC 278. Let me put it this way. I'm more excited for Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards 2 than I was for Israel Adesanya versus Jared Cannonier. And maybe that doesn't mean much, but at the same time, I'm just trying to say, I think this is a fight that's really being overlooked. And I think the reason it's being overlooked is based off the fighter's personality. And for me, that does not matter. I think these are 2 elite level welterweights fighting for the welterweight title. And on top of that, one thing that really gets me excited is the perceived threat of the challenger. And I really believe this could be the time that we see Kamaru Usman lose the welterweight title. I'm not saying I'm picking him. I haven't done my full breakdown and prediction yet. But this could be the fight where he loses his belt. Co-main event, I think it's super compelling. Can Paulo Costa get back on the winning track? Is Luke Rockhold's chin, you know, back from the ICU after being KO'd brutally twice in a row and then having 3 years off? I'm curious to see how that goes. And then Jose Aldo versus Merab Dvalishvili. Those are the 3 fights that really matter to me. And those are the 3 fights that primarily give me the reason for the grade I'm going to give UFC 278. And I am going to give UFC 278 a C+. I think this is a quality fight card. I don't think it's terrible. I'm a tough grader, so a C+ might seem bad to some of you, but I think this is a really good fight card. I think it could have used a better co-main event. If you throw a better co-main event on this card, I could see myself giving it a B+ instead. But I think this is a fight card that's being overlooked too much. I think it's got really 3 solid fights on the top of the card. And really, honestly, if this didn't have Harry Hunsucker versus Tyson Pedro opening up the main card, this probably would have been a B-. And that really dropped it down for me. And I could not overlook that opening up a pay-per-view main card. So don't forget to let me know what grade would you give UFC 278 down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.